Lordy, I hope there are tapes. Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
I don't recall.
No collusion.
Investing. Activism.
No obstruction.
This is the Jeff Santos Show.
I don't recall it. Not to my recollection. I don't have any recollection. I don't know. I don't know. I don't recall it. 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 I don't know. I don't recall it. I don't recall that. At this moment, I don't believe.
Well, it is time, folks.
I don't recall whether that was discussed or not. I don't recall that being discussed. Of the meeting.
We don't only talk to a great journalist, a great musician, great work of MTC. We go out west to Seattle, WA, where we find the Renaissance man, Mark Taylor-Canfield. Happy Sunday, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Jeff. I'm also finishing up a book, The Nick Savage Private Eye, film noir style mystery novel set in Seattle in 1947, and I got some new music coming out, so I've been busy.
Yeah, I guess so. You've been a man on the move, to say the least. Hey, I want to get your reflections here, as we've been with all of our contributors, on what happened in Parkland, Florida. I know that the Pacific Northwest, and I think Oregon more so than Washington, but, has seen gun violence in schools and parking lots of movie theaters and in other places. But, do you sense, as you have seen, in the Sanders movement and other places, young people, could they make a difference in this need for assault weapons ban, number one, and just tighter gun control measures, number two? Do you think that these young high school students who were victims, of this horrific shooting at the Douglas School and again in Parkland, Florida, do you think that we'll see change, or is this, just a flash in the pan?
Well, Jeff, there's a lot of sadness, of course, associated with it. And I think there's been a hashtag at Twitter about the shooting generation. This has been very sad for a lot of people to have to go through over and over again, it seems, in the United States. I think Tom Hartman the other day, who said that there have been more people killed in the last few years by gun violence in the U.S. than were killed in Vietnam, which is just a tragedy. So, yeah, I think young people are very aware of the problem. I know Washington State does have a lot of hunters and folks who live in rural areas. But at the same time, Seattle actually had a big gun buyback program not too long ago, where people turned in hundreds and hundreds of weapons. So I think if people are very aware of the issue, and now that we have a majority of Democrats in the Senate and the state legislature here, yeah, you can probably look to more progressive gun control in Washington State and in the Northwest in general. So a very sad issue, and one that's really difficult for people to talk about, but I guess we all need to process the grief, and especially, those families that were directly involved because of the victims. My heart goes out to them, and we all hope for healing all across this country where these incidents have happened.
We played earlier Leonard Skinner's 38 special and Saturday Night Special, I should say. There are many artists, and as a musician yourself, who have taken lead on this issue amongst others. Do you think that, we will see, much like we saw in the late 1960s, early 1970s, from all kind of bands, from Buffalo Springfield to Crosby, Stills, Nash, that we just played Marvin Gaye, against Vietnam? Do we sense that musicians may also play a big role here in the issue of gun safety? Because there's no country in the world. I never forget taking a plane trip from Athens to London with a Royal Air Force fighter pilot, and when he looked at me as an American and he says, "This is in 1988." He said, "What is going on in your country?" He goes, "Every time I turn on the TV, there's one more bullet, killing another person, whether it's in the inner city or in an office or whatever the case may be." I'm wondering, the rest of the world looks at this as we're some kind of, monster country, and maybe we have deserved that title, and how many people have killed, and but I'm wondering though if you musicians tell the story better and can influence people to act up in a way.
I can only say this, Jeff. One of our hometown heroes, Pearl Jam, they're heading out on a world tour. We can talk more about this too, but they're also going to be doing a couple shows in Seattle to raise money for homelessness. But they tweeted out, actually a couple days ago, this at their Twitter site, quote, "We deserve to live in a country where children live free from gun violence in their schools, in their homes, and in their communities." And then they give a link. For more information on the movement to end gun violence, visit everytown.org/act. So it's everytown.org is a website that is pushing to protect people. It has 7 actions you can take to prevent gun violence. So at least, in our city, we have folks like Pearl Jam who've done a lot of amazing work, by the way, to raise money through their Vitalogy Foundation, Vitalogy. They've done a lot of great stuff working with youth at risk in our city. Just hometown heroes. I mean, guys who really try to give back to the communities that they live in. And so, yes, Pearl Jam will be one of those bands. They're tweeting about it, and they're not the only ones. So I think if you look around on the web, you'll find a lot of musicians that are speaking out on this issue. And yeah, it is, there are a lot of young fans to the music out there, and they deserve to hear from their idols and mentors in the music industry about this issue. They need some reassurance that they can be safe. It's just a shame that we have a country where maybe it's not, internecine fighting, between different political groups so much, but it is this domestic violence problem, which has always been an issue since I can remember. And yeah, it's a symptom of a larger problem that we need to deal with, including all sorts of issues of mental illness and white supremacists and all sorts of things going on in this country that need to be addressed now. We can't wait. We can't wait for another incident like this. It's got to be addressed by our political leaders and by the artists in our communities. And everybody's got to join together on this. It's not just one person or one band, that can get it done. It's got to be all of us together. So I urge everyone to stay on this issue and do what you can to support bringing peace to our nation, because that's what we need right now. And I think we can end this kind of gun violence. There are rational, reasonable ways to do it. And, nobody is saying that we should, get rid of the Second Amendment. I mean, that's a major part of the U.S. Constitution. But when you have groups like the NRA that are funneling millions of dollars into these campaigns and people are using it as a political issue to get votes, now you're forgetting about the cost of the human lives involved. And we can't do that. We can't do that, Jeff, anymore.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it's a pretty simple thing. We need to have less killing in this country, and in so many ways. And violence is just out of control, and we need to stop it. And we need to stop it as soon as possible. And I think, musicians, people in the entertainment community. I saw the NHL hockey team, the Florida Panthers, concerned about what is happening in South Florida, and there's a lot there too. So people have to really stand tall, and I hope that they really do. 844-967-2789 is the phone number to join us. And I feel, Mark, as we go to break here, that there is an opportunity for young people to kind of take over the Democratic Party, much as they did in the 1960s with Vietnam, much as they did in the civil rights community. And, a lot of those people ran as the 1974 Watergate babies that were protesters of the late 60s and against the war. And maybe that is what we really need, because I think otherwise electing the same old is really not going to change it, and it's not going to motivate the American people to get out and vote. Half the population doesn't vote as it is. So you're going to need something special to really get people motivated to get out to the polls and change government and change policy and culture in this country in their lifetimes. Otherwise, it's just they're all a bunch of bums, and nobody really cares about me, and then therefore I'm not going to vote. And I think those are the options. Your thoughts before we go to break?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a moral issue, an ethical issue, a political issue, and maybe even a spiritual issue that people need to take on and confront directly. We can't let this go on. It's got to stop, Jeff. It's got to stop.
No doubt. We're right back with Mark Taylor-Canfield. It's the Jeff Santos Show. Back in a flash.
Any such conversation. I don't recall it.
He's a leaker. He's a leaker.
Wisconsin Republican Attorney General Brad Schimmel claims he will further investigate the investigators of the John Doe 2 investigation because it was all a partisan witch hunt. Wisconsin State Rep Chris Taylor said this.
There is absolutely no concern expressed by this Attorney General or these Republican legislators about the underlying criminal conduct that this corruption investigation revealed. Scott Walker was breaking laws.
And Brad Schimmel fails to acknowledge the 6 criminal convictions, 4 felonies of the Scott Walker John Doe 1. Was that also a partisan witch hunt?
One newspaper has done a good job. It's a national paper, the Wall Street Journal.
And A.G. Schimmel filed an embarrassing hack partisan bull report where he's still looking for the leaker. Get a clue! Wasn't it Eric O'Keefe from Wisconsin Club for Growth?
Well, it's I was born to do this.
This message was paid for by the People for People Corporation. Donate online at p4ppc.org, p4ppc.org.
You concerned about speaking up at work? Do you feel like you have no say in your day-to-day work routine? Join Teamsters Local 344. Call 414-258-4545. Get a seat at the table. Join your brothers and sisters in negotiating for better wages, hours, and working conditions, and be part of the most powerful union in North America. Teamsters Local 344 covers sales and service throughout southeast Wisconsin and package and airlines statewide. Contact Teamsters Local 344 at 414-258-4545 or at local344.org.
Take a look under your bed. Find stuff under there? What about jobs? No? Now try your basement. There's a pair of overalls that overall you're not so into anymore. A perfectly good laptop that hasn't sat in your lap in months. And even more stuff, but still no jobs? Well, you really have both. See, stuff is defined as household articles considered as a group. Sometimes this stuff is no longer needed. Wait, no longer needed? That can't be right. Because remember those jobs you were looking for? Those are really needed. And they're the stuff inside your stuff. Even inside that winter coat that moved with you to Phoenix. Our job is to unlock those jobs, and it starts when you donate your stuff to your local Goodwill. Here's how we do it. When you donate to Goodwill, we sell your stuff to provide job training for people right here in your community. So just by teaming up with Goodwill, you help create jobs. And isn't that worth parting with the leftover keytar from your 80s cover band? Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs. Find your nearest donation center at goodwill.org. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Hey everybody, I'm Daryl Ingram of News Talk 1510 WRRD, Wisconsin's Resistance Radio, and I am the Director of Advertising and Marketing. The pride of our independent stands runs deep in all that we do here at the station. The thing that I know for sure is that you can count on the quality and independent production of client advertising, mirroring the quality and independence of our fine programming here at News Talk 1510. To learn more, contact me at 414-335-0851 or via email at daryl@newstalk1510am.com.
This is the Jeff Santos Show.
Oh, a little Jeremy from Pearl Jam for you. Mark Taylor-Canfield writing with us today. Of course, the great journalist, great musician, and is talking earlier about what Pearl Jam is doing on their world tour. I'm going to try to see them. They come to Fenway Park this summer. A great summer. The Foo Fighters are back, and U2 is on tour. I know where I'm going to be this summer. Well, we got a lot to talk with Mark about some of the examples that some legislators that are progressive, legislators, that is the state houses, in this case Washington State, which is now finally comfortably Democratic. They have been in the House for years, but the Senate was always very much a 1 or 2 person difference between Republicans. Now it's solidly in Democratic hands, and they're doing good things like passing, voter registration legislation, same-day registration. And Mark, this is a great thing for the state of Washington, and it makes a difference, when you have a comfortable, lead in the Senate, not just by 1 or 2 votes, where Republicans can basically delay and stop progressive legislation from happening. Talk to me about that particular piece of legislation, the voting issue.
Unfortunately, it's a small majority at this point, but it's enough to get these bills passed. And there's not just voter registration, but there have been other issues like funding education. We talked in the past. I used to talk to you on Teacher Tuesdays about the Washington State Supreme Court holding our state legislature in contempt of court and fining them $150,000 a day because they were failing to adequately fund public education as is required by our state constitution. Well, now that we have a majority in both houses, I think we're going to see that deadlock change. We've got a governor, Jay Inslee, who would like to see that change. We also have, by the way, the most regressive tax system in the United States within Seattle, adding the local tax to the state sales tax. It's about 10% sales tax for retail items, except for food, thank goodness, in Seattle. So very regressive, very difficult for people on limited incomes, poor people, retired folks to just literally go out and buy something because of the huge taxes here. We don't have a state income tax. That's why all these other taxes have been levied, and that's why the car tabs and licensing fees are so high. Even our ferries are pretty expensive, unlike Staten Island, where I could ride the ferry for free back to Manhattan because they were subsidized. Here, they're pretty expensive. Well, we do now have a Democratic majority in the state Senate, and they did pass an instant voter registration bill, which allows people to register directly through their DMV registration for their driver's licenses. There's also several other bills that have been passed already involving transparency and other issues that have been very difficult for the Democrats because of the Republicans playing this obstructionist game. But yeah, I think things are moving in a different direction, and I will be reporting more about this over at the MTC report at YouTube, because I think it's important not just to our state, but to the rest of the country that some of these progressive issues move ahead. We've really been stuck in Washington State for a while with this obstructionist majority in the state legislature, and now I think it's finally moving ahead. So they've tried to block several bills lately, campaign finance bills, all sorts of issues of reform, and I think now we're finally at a point where some of these things can move ahead. So I think I'm looking forward to a new day in Washington State where I no longer have to apologize for my state legislature. And I'm not saying that the Democrats have the answers to everything, but at least they're willing to make some move and try to act to solve some of these issues rather than just sit back and let our education system fall apart. We just, by the way, had a big bus driver strike that went on for I think about 8 days, where the unions were striking against the subcontractor called First Student, which hires the bus drivers. And I actually had a friend who was involved in that strike who was on the picket lines, who's a major labor organizer, and he's reporting that since the strike ended about a week ago, the bus drivers have a much better pension and a much better health plan, and they're very happy. So the labor movement is also building strength. They had a huge strike fund this time, Jeff, so they were well prepared, and even the teachers walked out in support of the bus drivers, and that made a big difference. And then also the school board finally just kind of caved and said, hey, hey, First Students, you need to give in to these demands on the contract and just do the right thing. And so they have.
Well, so labor is strong, Mark, basically. It was what you're saying is labor, whether we're talking teachers, whether we're talking, the hard hats, that's a good sign, because we need to have our union brothers and sisters showing wins, showing toughness, and that's a great sign for all of us, Mark. I want to before we roll here, I want to ask you this: do you still feel, and I ask you this question quite often, are the Sanders people ready to take off for progressive candidates in the fall of 18, where you still need to defeat Republicans? And are they ready for 2020? Is it sort of kind of a building thing, or have they disappeared? I'm talking about the Sanders folks, the younger people in general, from 2016?
Well, they certainly haven't disappeared. And if the recent women's march is any indication, there's a huge movement towards activism and political activism in the state, and people are really fed up. The Sanders campaign really did reach out to rural communities in Washington state and places where the Clinton folks didn't really go. And so you have this sort of progressive populist movement. You've got a lot of young people who are still really irate about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and really want change. And, yeah, I think a lot of those folks, although they felt like they got kind of, chewed up and spit out by the political system, they're back and they're ready to organize. And even younger folks are now jumping in on the political movement here. So, yeah, I think they're ready for 2018 midterm elections to help even in other states around the country. And also, I think they're getting ready for 2020. And who knows? I mean, Bernie Sanders won every county in Washington state through the Democratic primaries. So, very strong candidate here, and I'm sure he'll be strong again if he decides to run, or if he decides to endorse other candidates. And the Our Revolution folks are strong here, and the Democracy for America folks are strong. So I think we've got good news coming for young folks organizing in Washington state for progressive causes and political elections. They got a lot of energy, and they're not happy about what's going on with the Trump administration, so they're ready to fight.
Well, that's great, and I urge them all, including yourself, to keep fighting. It is so great not only to talk with you, Mark, but to see that things in Washington State, which you've had a big influence on, are doing well. All the best. We'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Have yourself a good rest of the Sunday and on to a good week next week. All the best, Mark.
Rock on, everybody. We'll see you next time.
We're right back. You're tuned in to the Revolution Radio Network.
You are listening to Wisconsin's Resistance Radio, WRRD 1510.
The Russia Probe. I'm Ann Cates. President Trump will hold a listening session this week with high school students after last week's massacre in Florida. Students will hold rallies calling for stricter gun control around the country on March 24th. President Trump blames his predecessor for failing to stop Russian meddling in the election. Delaware Senator Chris Coons, appearing on CBS's Face the Nation, says it's time for the president to acknowledge what Moscow did.
To me, the most maddening question is, why is President Trump failing to act to protect our democracy when there is indisputable proof now that Russia interfered in our 2016 elections?
The Winter Games remain a hit in South Korea.
There were lots of empty seats at the alpine ski venues, but Pyeongchang Olympic spokesman Sung Baek-yu said ticket sales have been good. At the halfway point in the games, he said they sold 1 million tickets.
That means that we don't have many tickets remaining.
As for those empty seats, he said the venues were well sold, but then several ski competitions were postponed due to high winds. The new dates coincided with the Lunar New Year, and many ticket holders asked for refunds.
So I think that was one of the reasons that not many spectators were there.
Attendance at the two Olympic parks was heavy over the weekend. Saturday night featured traffic jams around both locations. Steve Kastenbaum in Pyeongchang.
I'm Ann Cates. Where is there diversity in America?
Jersey City, New Jersey leads the way as the most ethnically diverse city in the country, with 3 Maryland cities following: Gaithersburg, Germantown, and Silver Spring. Spring Valley, Nevada comes in at number 5, with New York City at 6, Oakland, California 7, San Jose, California 8, Rockville, Maryland 9, and Kent, West Virginia number 10. The 2 least ethnically diverse cities in the country are both in West Virginia, Parkersburg and Clarksburg, with Hialeah, Florida coming in at number 499. Hialeah has the highest concentration of Hispanics or Latinos at over 96%. Laconia, New Hampshire has the highest concentration of whites at just over 95.5%, and Jackson, Mississippi, the highest concentration of blacks at just over 80.8%. I'm John Stolness.
Black Panther, Marvel's first film directed by an African American, has made the 5th biggest debut ever with $192 million in box office. I'm Ann Kate.
And now, here's Jeff.
Hello, I'm State Senator LaTanya Johnson. Making sure Wisconsin residents continue to have equal and fair access to voting is very important to me. Here are some key things you should know. Wisconsin requires a photo ID, and chances are you already have what you need to vote. A Wisconsin DMV-issued driver's license. You can use this even if it's revoked or suspended. A Wisconsin DMV-issued identification card. A military ID issued by the U.S. Uniformed Services, or a U.S. passport book or card. You can use these items even if they're expired, as long as the expiration date is after the most recent general election held on November 8th, 2016. For more information about registering to vote, please visit myvote.wi.gov or call the Wisconsin Election Commission Help Desk at 608-261-2028. We won't be taken for granted.
This message was brought to you by WRRD 1510 AM.
Good afternoon. For News Talk 1510 AM, WRRD, Wisconsin's Resistance Radio, my name is Keith Gosted. The State Assembly has voted to send the Senate bill that rolls back regulations surrounding wetlands in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has regulations regarding wetlands that are not connected to larger waterways. Assembly Bill 547 seeks to exempt from permit process wetlands in broadly defined urban areas that are an acre or less, as well as wetlands outside of urban areas that are 3 acres or less. Wetlands act as pollution filters as well as help provide flood control. There are an estimated 1 million acres of wetlands in the state of Wisconsin. Weather ahead this week: Monday, 47th rain; Tuesday, 40 degrees chance of rain; Wednesday, 30 degrees, partly sunny. It is currently 35 degrees in Waukesha, 36 and sunny here on Brady Street. For News Talk 1510 AM, my name is Keith Gosted. And now live, it's the Jeff Santos Show. Here's Jeff.
Thank you, Keith. Hour 2 of the program. Welcome to it. We are live in Assembly Row, and a warmer than yesterday anyway. It's a little snowstorm last night, a few inches here in the ground in greater Boston. And today, though, in the high 40s with the sunshine out, and people are out about in the neighborhood. We got a discussion worthwhile today, not only on the issues of gun, but the economic issue and how they relate and how we can bring together black, brown, white people who need to improve their economic lives, need to improve their lives of being safe from guns. A very, very sad state of affairs in the United States of America. We welcome your phone calls today at 844-967-2789. That's 844-967-2789. Nobody better to start the second hour with than our great friend. He, of course, is a professor at City College in New York City, a great journalist, great book, Black Detroit, and of course, the Amsterdam News, where he does great work on a weekly basis. A great contributor to this show over the last number of years. And again, Herb Boyd, Marvin Gaye's song is so appropriate. It just never seems to change. Whether we're talking about gun violence, police brutality, whether we're talking about, tragic issues that affect this country. And it just never seems to stop. And there seems to be very little people who are willing to offer a solution. Reflect on me, Mr. Boyd, about what these last 4 days have conjured up in your mind as you reflect back on all the issues that have come before your eyes, particularly recently. Your thoughts, my friend?
Well, certainly, as ever, I welcome this opportunity to share some impressions, some feelings, with your ever-expanding audience. And one of the things that, I just finished doing an obituary on Lerone Bennett Jr. I don't know how familiar you are, Jeff, with his work over the years at Ebony Magazine, Johnson Publication, what have you.
Sure.
And he was a very, very close friend of mine over the years, and to hear of his passing and knowing that I had to reflect on this and just recall, how the clarity of his voice, his reasoning, his thinking, and how valuable it was in terms of influencing so many of us I know one of our callers, one of your regular callers, is Wayne out of Chicago, and I'm sure he could wax poetic, on the contributions, the legacy of Lerone Bennett Jr. And his voice, like listening to Marvin Gaye, and it's just so appropriate and just absolutely timeless and never out of style, you might say, in terms of trying to sum up and capture the essence of the turmoil, the madness of the moment, and try to gain some kind of perspective, the whole Sankofa notion of facing forward and looking back, how past is prologue, to have a president who is just so absolutely out of touch, with our sentiments, our concern about safety in this country. He won't even say the word guns, in fact, and realizing he had a campaign that was financed by the National Rifle Association to the tune of $30 million. And all of that comes home to us and begins to beg the question in terms of how do we move forward and what can be done about this situation in terms of stricter, stronger, gun control measures, what can be done about the unbearable cost and number of people who are suffering from mental illness in the society, and what happens when those two elements come together, when you have the mentally disturbed having access to assault weapons. It's a toxic, lethal mix, and one that seemingly we just can't get our arms around and get beyond, Jeff.
Talking with Herb Boyd here on the Jeff Santos Show, and let me just say this, Herb, you get it. We talked to Representative Barbara Lee just a few minutes ago, as an African-American hero, particularly on the issue of voting against the outrageous ability to give the President of the United States, and in this case President Bush, who lied us into war in Iraq, a free card, free go card to do that. And, I asked her, I said, is anything going to change? I mean, are we going to have to do it state by state? And she said, people are going to have to learn, that we cannot allow this to continue. I think about the assault weapon ban and the fact that we can't do that. I don't know, Herb, of another democracy in the world that would allow a teenager to buy a weapon, as many have said over the last 72 hours, that is only good for destruction. It has no purpose in any sort of self-defense. It shoots bullets at a fast pace, and it doesn't have accuracy. But when you are in a hallway with crowded high school students, it serves the purpose to kill. And if that's what we want to allow, then really are we a democracy any longer?
Well, one of the things about this in terms of the kind of comparison with other so-called democracies, and of course I always feel that comparisons are absolutely odious and we can get very little out of it, because I don't think any of the other democracies do they have like a National Rifle Association that can lobby with such formidable power, that has so many of our elected officials in their pockets, who can finance their run for offices and everything, who they can't seem to say anything. I mean, when you have the president who's absolutely powerless and wordless, when it comes to the kind of detriment we face, with the National Rifle Association, I think that speaks volumes. I mean, that kind of like this embodies everything we have to say about how we move on that situation, because the numbers, the masses of people who put him into office, probably stand shoulder to shoulder with him, with the National Rifle Association. And until we can break that relationship, we can undo the ties between the kind of reprehensible aspects of the NRA and too many of our elected officials. I don't think we can move the needle at all, Jeff.
Well, I'm concerned, and I really feel, Herb, that it's going to be young people that you're teaching, people that have taken to the airwaves in the last, 3 or 4 days, students at the Douglas High School where this took place. But I think it has to be from every high school in the country.
Yes,
and I'm thinking,
no doubt about it.
Like the civil rights marches, a lot of people who were in their 20s and teenagers back then. John Lewis was a very young man, as an example. To the anti-Vietnam movement. Those were young people. Those were not people in their 70s and 80s or in their 60s. There's some, but there were a lot of people who were leading the fight. And I think that we're going to need that again on a massive number, not just talking about a couple of high schools in Florida. I'm talking about a groundswell, hundreds of thousands. To me, that's the only way that's going to change it, because the NRA's got a grip on Congress, and they're not going to change it. And as you said, the president, Orange Julius, isn't even going to mention the term gun.
No doubt about it. I think you're absolutely right. In terms of what it's necessary, because after each one of these incidents, we're fraught with the same kind of, dilemma in terms of what do we do? How do you begin to fight back and organize and galvanize those forces out there? But if it continues, if these atrocities, these mass shootings continue as they have, I mean, we're already, we're not even deep into 2018, and we have occurrence after occurrence. And I guess we're talking about more than 4 individuals, more than 4 people are killed. And you look at the whole situation going back, even with the Las Vegas, say nothing of Sandy Hook. I mean, these are just atrocities of mass. These are mass killings in which, I mean, it cuts to the heart of the nation, in terms of how do people just totally exasperated in terms of like throwing their hands up and this ain't it, Marvin said. We got to do better and find ways to organize ourselves to fight back. And I think if they continue to happen, though, the conditions themselves will probably come to bring about those here mass demonstrations to say something about change in the society. They can't continue to go unanswered.
I'm talking with our good friend Herb Boyd here, great journalist, and of course, it's so great to have him on in these difficult times.
Oh, brother.
Let me ask you this: Do you think that if we were to sort of mobilize as we did in the 1960s, Vietnam, civil rights, that we can finally get some Democratic leaders to sort of, join in? Because, Barbara Lee, Bernie Sanders, a half dozen others, there are some folks there, but I'm talking about a majority of the Democratic Party, to sort of look at this issue and say, okay, nothing is being done. Republicans are in control of Congress. They were in control of Congress in the 1990s for the most part of that decade. They've had presidents from Nixon and Reagan and Bush Sr. They have been in power in some form or shape over the last 35 years, and not a lot has been done. And a lot of people have bought into the NRA. I think it's time that Democrats look at the Republican Party and say, the blood is on your hands because you haven't taken the leadership opportunity when you had it. Now, I think at the same time they should link the fact that they don't care. They only care about profit, and if the profit is made by a gun owner, by a gun company, a manufacturer, then they're going to give that person all the possibilities to do it because they don't believe in government. And I think that Democrats on the economic issues and on this issue of gun violence have a platform, but they got to use it and they got to merge it. And I don't know if they get it. Your thoughts?
Oh, no doubt about it. And I think the key words there for me in bold is the gun manufacturers and the NRA, the president always talk about no collusion, but there's certainly some collusion there, in terms of these forces coming together and what it means in terms of the access. And then what has to be done, to help a number of people in this country who are actually, suffering from some form of mental illness and not being properly treated. And then you have the FBI, which of course, in some of the letters that I've been reading on the blogs and coming into the various outlets, saying that the FBI has been so busy, trying to deal with this here Russian collusion in the last presidential election that they have kind of dropped the ball when it came to looking at the situation with Nicholas Cruz. When, of course, now they're trying to say that, but Jeff, there's so many, you cannot possibly watch everyone who bring even a scintilla, of terrorism into their profile. It was just, they're not prepared to do that. And after a while, it becomes like counterproductive because you've got so many in there that you may be watching the wrong one. So I don't know if that's necessary. That's part of the formula in terms of moving toward change is what can be done to kind of head them off at the pass. And, of course, they've intercepted quite a few. We just had one recently here in New York City where a couple of brothers who were planning, to do some bombing. And that was good because the red flag went up on them and they were able to get some calls coming in from people observing them buying certain materials, and then they make those calls come into the FBI. Same thing, with citizens being more alert. It's got to be part of this here formula for change. And not only alert in terms of spotting potential danger, but also taking that anger to the voting booth. That outrage has to be manifested in a way where we bring about change in these elected officials who are not doing us the service we deserve.
It's a real shame. We're talking with Herb Boyd here on the Jeff Santos Show. Again, we invite you to give us a shout, 844-967-2789. That's 844-967-2789. I want to bring back our good friend John from Minneapolis, who works in a hospital, Herb, and sees the horror. We didn't have earlier enough time, John, if you're still there, but I think that it is really important, to, as we had talked about before we went to break in the first hour, that there needs to be showing this, I think, graphic violence, and maybe it wakes up Americans.
Yeah, I agree that, I think it is waking people up. The problem is that we have a politics that serves the needs of rich corporations, the gun lobby, the NRA, which is essentially an arm of the gun lobby. It serves their needs first. They purchase these politicians at a national level, and so the structure is impermeable to change. And I think that, obviously we have to take over the Democratic Party and we have to change it to a populist party. Bernie Sanders proved by his running that it can be done, that you can, get power away from the traditional corporate party. He won lots of states. He had a rock star, following of people at his rallies, which indicates to me that, it is possible to really stir up a popular movement. But until we, until we get money out of politics, which would be overturning Citizens United and getting rid of the lobbyists that purchase these people, they are purchased, bought, and sold, by the huge corporations in the gun lobby.
No doubt. Let me hold you there because I want to get Herb's view here. John mentioned a couple of things about Citizens United and so forth. Here's though the opportunity. I think it is really important that whether it's Bernie Sanders or whether it's Senator Harris from California or other leaders, but we really need to figure out a way in which rural white Americans, the white guy, and African Americans, who both make $40,000 a year, to make sure that they have health care, that they have an opportunity to send their kid to college. Because if you can unite those two, now all of a sudden you have a winning coalition. And interestingly enough, it was Barack Obama who brought this winning coalition together in 2008 and 2012. And seemingly since the Democrats from 2014 and 2016, 2010, couldn't break through to the paper bag.
One of the things that John touched on, and I was reminded in terms of the Democratic Party and the need to kind of galvanize and consolidate those forces, is that the old expression that Will Rogers had about, I'm not a member of an organized political party, I'm a Democrat.
Yeah.
but one of the things about this is that it's certainly a situation in which we got a number of issues on the table, on the agenda. And if these lessons in the recent budget that they passed, this $4.4 trillion, whatever amount of money that is, and that has to be, allocated to various services with the Pentagon and the Defense Department. And I'm reminded of Dr. King's words a year before his assassination in the Riverside Church, where he said that it's just abominable to think that all of that money is being wasted on that war in Vietnam. And of course, we're 50 years now from the whole battle, some of the major battles in Vietnam, and which was a waste of money in terms of the poor people, the impoverished people in this country, the safety net, the Medicaid, Medicare, the food stamps, all of that, the whole national arts and humanities, all of that's just being eradicated. If those lessons are not coming home to the majority of Americans, we're in deep trouble. What can we say? I mean, if those conditions are not arousing them in such a way as to do something about it, to begin to march and protest and write those letters and get on their local politicians and begin to bring about change, then I don't know what can. I thought conditions would be enough to bring about that change, but apparently not. I mean, they seem to be enamored with a party that is so absolutely destructive in its means and purposes.
There's no doubt. Before we let you go, Herb, I want to ask you this question, because we talked about this about a month ago. A lot of people and the Republicans have actually, woke up, mainly because it's their constituents, on the opioid crisis. But we talked, and we've been talking for a long time about in the mid-1990s, and particularly in Harlem, where the crack cocaine epidemic was massive, and there weren't a lot of people. In fact, if anything, they further exasperated the problem with the legislation that they passed back then. But now people are concerned about the opioid. Maybe now, and I hate to think of it in this way, but it's true. The majority of kids that were killed the other day were white. And I'm wondering if the fact that suburban America, this has been going on in the cities, in the urban inner cities for a long time, as we know. Young 18, 19-year-old kids being gunned down in gang violence. Maybe now, that's a coalition, and maybe that's the coalition that the Democrats really need to hang on to or attach themselves to.
It's quite possibly. You hate to even get close to that notion of the chickens coming home to roost but we know full well it doesn't mean anything to middle America and certainly to rural America until these particular epidemics begin to strike home for them, when they see their young people, caught in the grip of the things that have been bedeviling us here in the urban so-called ghettos of America for a number of years. And suddenly it's just now expanded, it broke out of that barrier. It's no longer just confined, to the inner city, beginning to affect the whole inner America. And so now they can be aroused and concerned. If it takes that to bring it home to them, it's a tragedy if it is, but nonetheless, it may take that kind of a disaster warning to wake up these people. What's the word today they talk about? Are you woke?
Yeah, that's what Barbara Lee was saying. Woke. Well, hopefully everyone is woke. And Herb, always great catching up, my friend. We need to woke up America for sure.
Woke up America. There you go, Jeff.
There you go. All the best, my friend. We'll talk to you very soon. Herb Boyd.
Okay, thank you. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Talk to you next week. We're right back with Mark Taylor-Canfield, live from Seattle, WA. Oh, I could listen to Marvin Gaye all day. We're right back.
Republicans hijacked a Supreme Court appointment.
Will appropriately revisit the matter when it considers the qualifications of the nominee the next president nominates.
They have continued with the irresponsible nominations of unfit jurists by an unfit president.
I'd be struggling to remember.
We certainly have our own Supreme Court issues in Wisconsin.
Scott Walker was breaking laws.
We need a progressive justice who will stand up to the corruption that comes before the court, not one who will be complicit with it. Vote Tim Burns for Wisconsin Supreme Court, paid for by Burns for Wisconsin.
In the wake of a disaster, what one thing can you send that will help people the most? A blanket, a tent, a sandbag, a doctor. Actually, if you send a monetary donation, you send all these things. Even a small donation can make a big impact and can quickly become exactly what people affected by disaster need most.
In the wake of a hurricane, your monetary donation can make a huge difference to those in need. To donate, visit supporthurricanerelief.org. That's supporthurricanerelief.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Juice, Mom! Juice, juice, juice! Mommy, why are we going to the store? Mom, I want juice! Mom! Juice, juice, juice! Mom!
Your child will have different needs at different stages of life, and that includes the car seat. See, car crashes are a leading killer of children ages 1 to 13. Protect your child's future at every stage of life. Go to safercar.gov/the right seat.
A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
The Resistance is live 7 days a week here on 1510 AM WRRD, Wisconsin's Resistance Radio. Tune in Sundays for Meet the Press with Chuck Todd from 11 a.m. to noon. Then it's the Jeff Santos Show, kicking ass for the middle class from 12 to 3 p.m. And Citizen Action's Battleground Wisconsin rages from 3 to 4 p.m. Get your groove on with Stu Man PM, politics and music, 4 to 6 p.m. with Stu Daniels. Always streaming at newstalk1510am.com, Wisconsin's Resistance Radio.
Good afternoon for News Talk 1510 AM. My name is Keith Gosted. Two of the Milwaukee County Sheriff's staff charged in the death of Terrell Thomas, Sheriff's Major Nancy Evans, and Jail Lieutenant Kashka Meters resigned earlier last week, according to Acting County Sheriff Richard Schmidt. Evans was charged with felony misconduct in office and obstructing an officer, while Meters, along with James Ramsey Guy, were charged with felony offense of neglecting an inmate. Terrell Thomas died of profound dehydration after staff shut off water to his cell to, quote, settle him down. At the time, the jail was under the leadership of Sheriff David Clark. Clark was known for waking up inmates with bullhorns and eliminating prisoner programs, as well as handing out harsh punishments to prisoners that broke rules. When asked to resign, Clark called that fake news. Current Acting Sheriff Schmidt said, "I'm a human being. I have family members. If this turns out to be exactly the way they've written, it is horrific." Currently 35 in Waukesha, 36 in Brady Street. For News Talk 1510 AM, I'm Keith Gosted.
It is hour 3 of the Jeff Santos Show. Welcome to it. We're going to be talking with our good friend Joe Williams, U.S. News World Report, former D.C. Bureau Chief of the Revolution Radio Network. And about 3:30 Eastern Time. We are